We are honored tonight to have, as we've done for the two other Democratic candidates, Jay Gonzalez and Sept Warren. We have Bob Massie here, who's the third Democratic candidate for governor, and he's going to speak for maybe a half hour or so.
Oh, less than that.
Less
Don't
than
worry.
that,
Don't
and
worry.
then he'll take your questions.
Yeah.
But so please give him your full undivided attention, please. Without further ado, Bob Massie. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you. Well, I want to start by thanking Rich and thanking Lisa. You have extraordinary leadership here. I want to thank Representative Casero. Are you still here? There you are. Good to see you. And Representative Cabral, thank you also for being here. I'm glad to be back in New Bedford. It's one of Massachusetts' most extraordinary communities. And I tell you, the reason I'm running for governor is because I believe that the whole economy right now is upside down. And what I mean by that is that the basic elements of our citizenship, the things that allow us to enter the middle class and stay there, are becoming much harder for everyone, for us, for our young people. And I think specifically back in 1942, Franklin Roosevelt gave a wonderful State of the Union. 1944, wonderful State of the Union, where he was just back from Europe and we were still in the middle of World War II, and he was already thinking about what kind of country we should be after the war was over. Now imagine, he took us through the Depression, he took us through the war, and he said, we've come a long way in recognizing our political Bill of Rights, and now we have to recognize that we also have an economic Bill of Rights. And he said the key elements of our freedom as Americans are a good home, a good school, a good doctor, and a good job. And if you have those four things, if you have a home, and if you have education, and if you have medical care, and if you have a job, then you can build the kind of life that you want through your energy and opportunity and your commitment and your hard work. But if you don't have those things, if you don't have a home, if you never had access to education, you can't get one now, if you don't have access to health care as a right, and you don't have a job, then our freedom is compromised. And I think that's especially true today. When you look around, it is becoming harder to own a home and harder to get an education and harder to get good medical care and very hard to maintain a decent job. Let me give you a specific example. We have seen the American people, hardworking people, create more and more wealth. Our productivity has gone up and up and up. And yet our wages have stayed flat. Productivity goes up 80%. Our wages go up 5%. So the system that we have, which is supposed to where we create wealth and that comes back to us in higher wages, comes back to us in benefits to our community, that's not happening. And instead, what's happening is much of the wealth that we are creating is moving upwards and being lost in the casino at Wall Street. There's another problem, which is that more and more industries are taking more from us because they're becoming so concentrated that they don't have that much competition. That's why we see the fossil fuel companies doing whatever they want. We see utility companies doing things that are not in our public interest. We see pharmaceutical companies driving up prices. We see internet companies trying to get more for themselves. That's a pattern all across the economy, and it's affecting us here in Massachusetts, and it's affecting you here right in New Bedford. Because we could be launching into a new economy with tens of thousands of jobs that is appropriate for the 21st century, but we're not doing that. We're not doing that because many of the institutions and businesses and even parts of our national government and our state government are serving the interest of these old systems because they want to hang on to them. Let me give you two examples, and I'll do a little show and tell. We all like show and tell, right? So right here in New Bedford, you know better than I do, you have a whole array of challenges. Those challenges could be addressed if New Bedford took on the role that it is destined to take on, which is being the leading city in this state and across the region for renewable wind energy. And we've put a lot of money, and there's a lot of jobs at stake, And you'd think that this governor would say, wow, this is the most extraordinary example, the greatest economic opportunity in the history of Massachusetts, and therefore we're going to go pedal to the metal and we are going to develop this industry and all the jobs, the construction jobs, the electrician jobs, all the other jobs, and it's going to boost New Bedford, where we've already invested in the port. No, that is not what's happening. This governor is investing in pipelines. This governor is slowing down wind. This governor has a Department of Public Utilities controlled by fossil fuel. This governor is slowing down solar. Now, why do that? It really doesn't make sense because most of the countries of the world have realized that fossil fuel is broken and dying industry, and they are racing forward. And they are far ahead of us. Let me tell you, I know it's painful to hear, but the United States is nowhere near the lead. Let me give you one example. I had the chance to tour Europe, and we know countries all across Europe are doing an extraordinary job. One country, Denmark, which is the same size as Massachusetts, committed to wind energy 20 years ago, and they have something like 1,300 offshore windmills. They get almost 50% of all their electricity from basically free wind over the horizon. And we, in the United States, does anyone want to guess how many windmills are operating today in the United States?
Offshore?
5 is the right answer, right off Block Island, that started turning a year and a half ago. And now we have the opportunity, we're going to see the governor signing contracts, but you can either go at it slow or you can go at it in a massive commitment. And guess which this governor is doing? Slow. Now, I want to show you something, and I'm going to pass this around. This is a plan, you see all those windmills, to move rapidly to clean renewable energy. And on the back, in case the governor needs some help, is the 22 specific suggestions that we could do right away. Now, I just want to tell you something. These are not going to happen if we re-elect him. And yet they are key to our future. And I'll just show you, since I'm doing show and tell, I'll show you another one. We put the energy one out 3 weeks ago. We put this one out this week. You won't be able to see until you see it, but right on the front are 2 bullet trains in Japan. These trains, which have been around for a long time, go 160 miles an hour. To give you an idea of how fast that would be, if you went 160 miles between Boston and Worcester, or I would imagine even Boston and New Bedford, you could do it in 20 minutes. And you could get to Springfield in 40 minutes. Now this system, this commitment, long-term commitment to rebuilding energy, rebuilding transportation, is not a science fiction abstraction, and it's not something just for the elites. This would affect our quality of life, and it would tie our cities and towns together, and it would help free up, it would help communities that have jobs with no housing and communities that have housing with no jobs. All these things are linked together. And yet this governor, if you go and read his State of the State, there is no serious long-term plan for pretty much anything. I don't even know why, because he says he's from this business background. I'll tell you a little bit about my background in a minute. But the number one rule in a good business is that you have to invest in the future. And we're not seeing that here. All right, so good home, good school, good doctor, good job, and a transportation system that equals those or exceeds those, and a move into the 21st century. That's what I'm proposing as if I become your governor. Now, let me tell you a little bit about myself, because you say, well, it's fine if you talk about it, but how do we know you could do it? So I need to tell you a little bit both about my personal background and then my professional background. This is a little unusual, just want to say. Anthony is a wonderful reporter, so I'm delighted he's here, but I'm not used to being quite so close to the microphone. Anyway, so the thing you need to know is I have the fire to get this done. And why? Because when I grew up, I was born with a very serious illness called hemophilia, genetic illness, that affects your joints. You get bleeding in your joints. So what that meant was, within a couple of years, I had many bleedings in those joints. And by the time I was 4, I lost the ability to walk. I was in leg braces, I was in a wheelchair. And we worried that the big pharmaceutical companies would stop making the products that I needed. We worried about the insurance companies would cut us off. I was able to make it through, but I spent my childhood being one of the people that when I walk into a room, people would react with fear. Kids would look at me and I was different. And before I could open my mouth, often people rejected me. And it did not take me long to realize that I was not unique in experiencing this, that many people, for many different reasons, experience exclusion and injustice, or experience that fear when they know that if they lose one little piece of support, their whole life is going to go down the drain. So by the time I was in high school, I was an activist, and I've been a lifelong social justice activist and environmental activist. If you elect me governor, that's what you're getting. Somebody who is committed to change, somebody who's committed to fighting for economic justice, racial justice, gender justice, regional justice. That's been my whole life. I started off as a minister about 36 years ago, and I worked on the things that you'd expect a minister to do, opened a homeless shelter. But I was so interested in the question of economic prosperity that I eventually did something crazy, and I've done a couple of these things. I applied to, and I was admitted to, the doctoral program at Harvard Business School with a scholarship. So this is be careful what you wish for. So I got in there in '84, and I was treated, like that I was an oddity. Look at this, a person who believes government can play a role. But there were very good people there. I learned how important it is to have a strong business sector, but I also learned that big companies can do a lot of damage when the only thing they're interested in is maximizing shareholder return. And so I then built my career first as a professor, and then as a person bringing pension funds and businesses and activist groups and community leaders to design structural change. Remember, I said the economy is upside down. Well, you have to understand how to bring it back right side up. And so there are several different projects I've been involved in that I don't want to tell you about at length, so in the questions we can come back to them. But some of you will remember that I jumped into the '94 lieutenant governor race, and it was a crazy thing to do. I didn't have any political experience or name recognition or secret trust fund. But I could sense that people were ready to talk about the real foundational issues. I had just come back from writing a book about South Africa. I saw what the democracy could do there. I was fired up about what democracy could be. And at that time, all we were talking about was crime, welfare, and taxes, which were all various forms of attack on poor people. So I won that primary. I lost to Bill Weld, but that didn't matter because I realized this is what I love doing, going out and making change and hopefully inspiring people to work together. So I ran a couple of these organizations, and one of them was a big international group that was designed to hold big companies accountable by having them measure and disclose what they did. I also worked very early on climate change, and I've been fighting for racial justice for my whole career. So what I believe is that we can either view this election as, well, Charlie is unbeatable and you might as well not even try, and anyway, everything's going fine. It's not going fine. You know it and I know. It's not going fine yet in New Bedford. It's not going fine in 200 other communities I've visited. People need help, and they're ready to come together, and they're ready for change. And I just want to tell you, Charlie Baker doesn't think that we will fight back. He's performing what I think of as a major Jedi mind trick. Okay, ready? I'm very popular. I have a lot of money, and I'm incredibly tall.
So what's the matter with that?
This is not the race you are looking for. If we believe that, we're going to lose. But if we remember that we have core democratic values that we are fighting for since FDR fought for them, that we have remained committed to, that are under attack today, that we can come together and that we can build a coordinated campaign that includes not only the wonderful Maura Healey, not only the incredible Elizabeth Warren, but an Elizabeth Warren who won 1.7 million votes when she was elected. Charlie Baker only got 1.1 million votes, and let me help him with the math. That means that he got 600,000 less votes. And if we work together, If we pull a convention together, if we pull a primary together, then we're going to go into a coordinated campaign with Elizabeth at the head and Maura Healey, and I hope me as your nominee for governor, and we are going to build an army that his money can do nothing about. And then, yeah. And then I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take action in each one of these areas. So we can make significant changes in our economy. We can invest more in local business, through local capital, through different forms of ownership. We can open up ownership for small business and housing for people who haven't had access to that. In addition, I'm going to fire the entire Department of Public Utilities, the commissioners, because they have been supporting fossil fuel. They just raised the cost of taking on solar because they thought it was a hardship for the utilities. Those utilities don't work for us, even though they're supposed to be public utilities. They work for the hedge funds and the institutional investors that own them. And that we should be done with that. And we're going to make other structural changes. But here's the exciting thing for me. I have the experience and the track record of being committed. But I also have this little Harvard Business School theme. So people come to me and say, look, that's just not possible because of blah, 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 some financial thing. I know it's not true. I know businesses are able to dream big. There's no reason that we can't dream big. There's no reason that we can't have a high-speed rail system, that we can get people to work on time. There's no reason that we can't move to 100% renewable energy. We can concoct certain reasons, but ultimately this is not a question of technology, and it's not even really a question of funding. It's a question of political will and, more than anything, political leadership. So I just want to wrap up today because I want to remind all of you that we live in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts has bred many, many bold leaders who have changed this country. And some of them have the last name Kennedy. You'll remember that Jack Kennedy, when he was in Houston, and he talked about going to the moon, he said, we go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And Bobby Kennedy used to say, some people see things the way they are and ask why. I see things that never were and ask, why not? And then Teddy Kennedy, who you may remember ran for re-election against Mitt Romney in that strange election of 1994. I had the privilege of traveling with him around the state. And he used to say, taking on great challenges is what we do as Americans. We scale the heights. We go to the moon. I've seen it. I've lived it. I know it. And we can do it again. That's the spirit I'm bringing to this race because I know it's not just about me. It's about us. It's about our dreams, our work together, our longing, and our skill at building a new future. And I just want to tell you something. Do not lose heart. Do not fall for the Jedi mind trick. Because if we can win in New Jersey, and if we can win in Virginia, and if we can win in Wisconsin, and if we can win in Alabama, if a Democrat can win in Alabama, a Democrat can win in Massachusetts. I would. I'm fired up. I'm ready to go. I am a happy warrior. I see people are ready for change. I don't care how much is in his bank because we have each other. And I'd like to ask for your vote. I'd like to ask for your support. I'd like to ask you to engage. I'd like to ask you to go to the convention as a delegate for me. But whatever you do, get involved now. Because if we clear out that corner office, it will send a signal and a lightning bolt right to the top of that weird orange head in the White House. And we want to wake him up and say that we are done with his form of politics, and we are done with governors who coddle him, and we are ready for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. We're going to take questions if anybody has questions.
Well, thank you very much for coming down. I'm from the Coalition for Social Justice, and we're working a lot on jobs, not jails. Both houses have done comprehensive criminal reform. What's your take on the state's criminal justice system, which, in my opinion, doesn't look very blue?
It's utterly broken, and it's part of the larger problem. And the larger problem is that we simply aren't creating enough economic opportunity for people. And we have constructed what all of you know is the school-to-jail pipeline, which takes kids who are ready to go into and building their own lives, and if they commit an infraction, they go to jail, and that determines the entire future. We also use solitary confinement, which is viewed as torture around the world, and we spend far more on putting people in jail than helping them get out. And then this is very connected to many other questions. The institutionalized racism in Massachusetts, which tends to criminalize some behaviors for people of color while others get off. And it also is part of the opioid crisis, where we create sufficient despair among our young people who do not believe they have a future that they start turning to different forms of addiction. And then we don't have a way for really treating them. And I know that some in the legislature have not only addressed the addiction problem, and I very much support the criminal justice bills that have passed, and I hope they favor the Senate bill when they finally come out. But I'll tell you something. You're going to need a passionate governor who understands that these need to be implemented. It's not just a question of passing a law, it's implementing it. And in my reading of American history, we go back and forth through very punitive periods where we want to lock them up and throw away the key, which I think is crazy, counterproductive. And then we go to periods where we think, no, wait, we want to help treat people so they can re-enter society and vote, by the way, in Florida and other places. Fortunately, we're now moving back in the direction of rethinking it, but we have to follow through. And that's something I think, I hope you can tell. I believe not just in getting stuff passed, but getting stuff done. And the experience that I've had of bringing people together who fundamentally disagree and helping them understand that we are one Commonwealth with one common future is I've had strong experience with that. I'm coming across a little fiery here, and that's part of who I am. But I'm also a negotiator, a reconciler. I mentioned that I started my career in ministry. I understand that we have to really sit down and listen to each other and then have a bold direction that we pursue after we have finally heard each other. This is long overdue for being fixed, and I commend the people in the legislature who recognized and fought for it. But we still have a lot to do.
What can be done at the state, what would you do at the state level to address the issue of immigration?
So, first of all, I want to be clear that I do believe in the rule of law, but I believe that it should be a sanctuary state. We are a nation of immigrants. We need to be able to welcome people, and we need to be able to recognize the major contributions that people who may not have the documentation, the full documentation, but who have, in a sense, acted as citizens for their entire time here. Paying taxes, working, raising families, sending kids to school. I think the behavior of President Trump is one more abomination that's coming out of him, specifically targeting young people or people who are not criminals, may have small infractions, breaking them from their families and sending them back. So number one, I would follow the Sanctuary State Bill, the Safe Communities Act. We should not be deputizing our state and local police to serve as agents of a completely unhinged ICE. This is not only a matter of morality, though that's important. It's also a matter of public safety. There are chiefs of police all over the state who says if you want to protect communities and you want to solve crimes, the last thing you want to do is terrify a major portion of the population who will not come to you, not share information, hide from you. So I don't know if you wish to add to that, but for me, we have to remain a city and a state that remains committed to what I think are the core principles of the United States, which are embodied on the Statue of Liberty. So again, we have to have certain laws and procedures, but they must be ones that recognize that our fundamental purpose has always been to welcome people from other countries.
I have related questions on the issue of immigration. One, how would you get it done to eliminate ICE and the sheriff's associations from using ICE as in part of the legislation, because it's now sitting sitting in the Senate or Ways and Means Committee. How would you get that done?
Get done meaning how would you get it passed?
Eliminate getting ICE being people deputizing.
Well, my understanding of the language in the Safe Communities Act is that it bars that. So if you pass it and it's signed into law, that's the first step. The second step is that the governor is responsible for and oversees the state police. And the state police are responsive to what the chief executive says. So, I mean, I'm not saying this is easy, but I do think that once you've laid down a clear set of guidelines that are being enforced both by the leadership and the values of all of us, but especially the governor, I think, I don't want to say it's a simple issue, but we need to establish first that that's the principle, and then we need to live up to and enforce that principle.
The second related question is, Senator Galvin has proposed that that we do not accept citizenship, the U.S. Census. Only those people who are citizens would be counted in the U.S. Census. What is your position on that, and how would you enforce that if the federal government said we were going to only census citizens?
Well, first, I think you're referring to Attorney General Sessions and the consensus wants to put citizenship. The first step is to block that. I don't know what our complete options would be. I mean, we might say we're not going to distribute these things. I don't know. I do know that it's completely counterproductive and damaging to our congressional districts and everything else, because if we don't count the people who are there, then they don't exist, in which case we are underrepresented as an entire state. So I think I'm hoping that the federal government can be prevented from taking that step. I'm not sure what our full legal options would be, but I think I'm sure that we have, let me tell you, in addition to legal steps, there are always forms of communal resistance that we can pursue if we really believe something is fundamentally unfair.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking, it's just about your general position, because I think this contradiction, you have places like Fall River, New Bedford, and not only, you have the Brocktons, the Lowells, the Lawrences, and if my memory serves me well, it's about, 2 out of 3 people, 2 out of 3 families own their own home. And then you have these gateway cities where it's 1 out of 3. You have a Brookline that has, nearly, 10 times the housing value of a place like Fall River.
Yeah.
And you have the paradox that if every locality is on its own, they don't have the tax base. They could tax their at 3 times the rate, but if they have 8 times less the property tax base, you're gonna be in such a circumstances. The middle class is gonna flee, go to wealthier communities, pay lesser taxes per thousand, and get a lot more services. And you have that polarization that takes place, unless the state has a key role in devising formulas that take into consideration that the state, we're all in this together, and we can't let the communities, be, solely dependent on themselves.
Right.
That the state has a role in sustaining the educational system and the other services, so that there's a minimal standard statewide. So, I guess just a recognition that there's a lot of, urban areas that have been, gateway cities 100 years ago, and they continue to be the case now.
So let me just comment on that. Our economy has changed repeatedly over the last 200 years, and we established many of these gateway cities because of local industries that developed, whether they were manufacturing, whether they were whaling, whether they were shoe manufacturing up in the Peabody area. I have been in 200 communities, and I have seen how there are some communities that have been able to make a kind of transition, but most are stuck. And part of it is the state, in my judgment, has failed to provide the infrastructure for the transition. So the roads and the internet connection, which is a critical issue in many parts of the state, and the public transportation and railway system. Let me just share how bad this is. I want to go back to the utilities for a second. We have, I think, 40 or 41 municipal utilities that are locally controlled power. And some of them even provide municipal broadband. But that's a great model, and it could bring down the prices that we pay on our energy bill and I pay for internet. But we're blocked from doing that because the legislation says that has been in place since 1920 that if you want to put a new system, you have to pay whatever the utility tells you is the price. So they essentially have a veto. But let me broaden your question really quickly. What I heard in your question is a question about inequality and also a question about formulas for making things more fair. So the inequality question, there are two fundamental questions of inequality. One is wages, which we talked about briefly. I support the $15 minimum wage. I support paid family and medical leave. Yeah, but let me tell you, that's not even enough. I mean, even somebody making $15 an hour in 4 years cannot provide in most communities. I think $15,000 comes to a little over $20,000 after taxes, and so that's $24,000 a year. And a one-bedroom apartment in Somerville, which is a great town, but it's not necessarily a wealthy town, is $2,300 a month. So we have a mismatch. So that's on the wage side. On the wealth side, we have, as you pointed out, communities where you can own a home or you can own a small business, and many, many, many other communities shut away from that. And let me just give you a specific example. In Somerville, we are the home of the triple-decker. And the triple-decker, between 1880 and 1920, you'd be able, 3 apartments stacked on each other, and you could buy one and put, mom on the second floor to help with the kids and rent the third floor. And then a number of years later, mom isn't there, the kids are grown, you rent both. And then after 25 years, you own the whole thing. And so you can start on a worker's salary, and then you could end up with some real wealth to retire on. Those systems don't work anymore. We all now have condos in Somerville. So we need to design mechanisms for building equity in both senses, things that are more fair and more accessible. Now here's the good news. I ran something called the New Economy Coalition, and there's lots of models out there how to do it. We just need a governor who's aware of it. He and I went to business school in the 1980s. I think he still thinks it is the 1980s. We need to address the economic challenges of today and tap all of that creativity that we have and that many good folks in business have to solve these problems. What is not acceptable is the kind of state of the state address where he says, well, we've made a little progress and that's pretty good. It's not enough. And I think we can all feel it, and we have become used to it, and we become used to people saying, that's about all we can do. I don't think so. I think we can set a bold goal, have a group conversation, figure out how we would benefit from it, figure out how much it would cost us not to do it, and then move forward in a 10-year plan to solve these problems. Again, this is not actually rocket science. Other countries have figured this out, but we need to not only to figure it out, but to make it possible, and that requires deep, active political engagement now.
You mentioned a fight for 15.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you said that, because that stole a little bit of my thunder, but that's good that you're supporting that, as well as the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act.
And fair share.
And fair share, okay. So
Yeah.
the millionaire's tax, he's on board with that, which is
Yeah.
great. And there are plenty of people in this room that have put a lot of time into those issues.
Absolutely.
Because
I'm sorry I didn't mention it first. I mean,
we realize how important it is.
Yeah.
The other thing we've mentioned and we've talked about, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but the stunning amount of college underfunding of colleges and debt that we have a woman in this room who's got $140,000 in college debt. How is this woman ever going to be able to own a home? It's unconscionable that we do this in this country. And as you said, traveling through Europe, there are all these countries that send their kids to school for free, to college for free. When are we going to break out of this so that we can unchain this talent that we have and set it free?
Before I ran for governor, I ran a program at UMass Boston called the Sustainable Solutions Lab. And we looked at the relationship between local low-income communities, communities of color, and the problems of climate change that are coming at them. But one thing I can tell you is I had wonderful students who are working 1 or 2 jobs, taking 4 to 6 years, and they are coming out with this massive debt. I've met a woman who has $60,000 in debt and then had to drop out of her program, so she's got the debt but not the degree. I met a guy down in Brockton who has $180,000 of debt. So you're exactly right. We are taking our young people and we're putting them in a kind of invisible jail. And that is especially true for low-income communities and communities of color. So, we either, to my mind, you have to see a problem clearly and be honest about it. Secondly, you have to set out a goal. In this case, we need to bring down the cost of education, which would require more money than the fair share tax. But I think we're ready for that conversation. Massachusetts created public education. People hate paying taxes for a perfectly reasonable explanation. You know, they don't think that we don't have that much money. We don't think the money's going to go to something that will really help us, and it's going to end up being stolen. I mean, that's the reaction. But if you really say, what would it mean to each family or to each person if we brought it down first so that it was debt-free and then eventually it was tuition-free, I think you'd have a lot of takers. And one of the great things about being a governor that this governor never uses is that you have the ability to spotlight issues, to convene people, to say, I don't have all the answers, but together we can figure them out. This is critical. Just like not funding the transportation system is setting us up for failure, or not moving to renewable energy sets us up for failure, not supporting our young people who are doing everything we've told them that they're supposed to do, setting them up for failure, that's going to create a collapse in confidence in the American dream. And then we shouldn't be surprised when people all vote for Trump, because he's just going to say anything. We have to have a real plan, but also a real commitment. And again, that's our values connected to our leadership. And I just want to say, I have met so many of our legislators who are ready to move. It's like there's a pot and there's plenty of stuff inside to make soup. You just need more heat from the outside. I will be that heat.
I think we're actually the real pro-life party. We're never going to ban abortion out of existence. It will happen regardless of whether it's legal or not. But we need to make it unnecessary. And why don't the Democrats ever tout that? Like, we're making abortion unnecessary. Nobody likes abortion. And I think that's a big issue, and I wanted to bring that up because it might give you the chance to talk about your stance on these women's issues. And I think the economic problems are part of the reason all this stuff has gone on in Hollywood and in business for all these years. People are so terrified. They can't unionize. They can't stand up for their personal liberties and rights and to be free from sexual harassment and exploitation because they're so terrified there's no social safety net.
So first of all, I want to thank you because you are the first person in about 4 weeks who's asked me anything about women's issues. That's a certain commentary by itself. And I have, for those of you who've seen me in debates and forums, I usually bring them up because I can't believe it. So let me try and give a brief answer to a complicated question. First of all, we need to recognize that women have very particular medical and other issues that need particular attention and support, whether it's reproductive rights, whether it's contraception, whether it's child and maternal health, and on and on and on. There are many special questions. With regard to reproductive rights, you know, I'm a man, so there's only so much I feel I can really comment about this. But I think that given that this is such an intensely personal question, the last thing we need to do, which this president keeps trying to suggest, is to bring in the police and the courts and the prison system to subject American citizens to the will of other people simply because they don't agree. That's really when you talk about, and then all of the public health and consequences. But let me keep going. There's issues of pay equity. There's issues of board and other forms of diversity. There's issues of women in politics. I'm not helping very much with that, I do acknowledge, but I can say, and after a previous race, I took all the money, or virtually all of the money that I had left over, and I gave it to Emerge. And some of you know Emerge, which trains women to run for office. So it would be a very active commitment in mine to increase the number of women who are elected, because these conversations would then come up. And they'd come up led by the people whom they most affect. And that's the idea behind democracy. So I think I'll stop there because otherwise we can keep going for some time. I left out an important piece of my biography. I mentioned the hemophilia, but I have also been through other illnesses. By the way, I'm doing fine, but I had hepatitis C and I had a liver transplant, which cured the hepatitis and liver problems, and even cured the hemophilia. But one of the reasons I'm running, and I'd really like you to hear this, is because I've been through enough stuff in my life, and I've reached a point in my life where I feel like we need to just go out there and do what we really believe in. None of us has that much time here. We have major issues, we have tremendous dangers, and we have enormous opportunities. And I think as human beings, we have a very special obligation and opportunity to go after and create the world that we want. That's what our ancestors did. That's why we live in the country we live in today. And now we have to carry that tradition forward and make sure that we do the things today that will have people in the future, our children and grandchildren, saying, thank God they had the insight and the courage to act instead of what was wrong with them. And that's where we're headed right now. But we can take that back. And I'll say, I would love to have your support. You can write to me. My email is bob@bobmassey2018.com. And more than anything, I mean, I come across as a strong guy with a lot of opinions, but I believe in grassroots work. I believe in coming together. I believe in working together, defining the dream together, and then getting it done together. And that's the kind of governor I would be. And I hope that's the kind of governor you want, because I think if I'm actually elected, we would have a great time. So thank you.